The most iconic creature in all of Gemstone is probably the mighty giant rat. Back in the AOL glory days, I remember the landing cul-de-sac being a pretty popular hangout spot. And even now, I can't imagine anybody starting out in this game without spending some significant time in the catacombs circling that little loop near the entrance. But as well known and beloved as the giant rat is, kobolds are my favorite creatures in Gemstone. They were the first creatures that I actually paid attention to because they aren't just brainless mobs. They're feckless and goofy and dumb, and they knock each other down when they're fighting and attack each other, but then they apologize for doing so, and they quote Shakespeare when one of them watches a friend die. They have personality. It's obvious that they were made to invite a reaction. They help tell a story. And that's ultimately what Gemstone is, I think. A story machine. I once heard another player describe the game as imagining yourself at the center of a fantasy book you were writing yourself, while others were simultaneously writing with you, but also for themselves. And in a text-based game, imagination is pretty much everything. You come up with an idea of what you want your character to be and look like and do, and then you figure out how to make that idea into a reality. Or something like a reality, anyway. Something you can type and make real for other players in the book that we're all writing together. And that's why I love kobolds. They help us do that. They're like role-playing training wheels. They're a wake-up call that you can do more than just hunt and fry and rest. You might see kobold antics as pathetic or obnoxious or endearing or crude, but that choice, how to see them, is one that helps you build the story of your character. I didn't used to pay kobolds much attention. I would blow through an area in order to level and move on to the next area without really giving anything much of a second thought, but doing that, I think, makes you miss out on a lot of the depth that lives hidden in this game, waiting for you to find it. In today's episode, we'll get a little peek behind the Game Master curtain to learn more about storytelling and how you might be able to step away from min-maxing your character to stop and smell the kobolds. Or, just watch them, maybe. I'm Milax, and this is Town Square Central. Our first guest today is Quilic, a game master who specializes in storytelling. He's worked on a number of storylines, including The Green Lady, The Carnival of Freaks, Those Aren't Tears, and the recently completed Nazor Chronicles Chapter 1. Quilic, welcome to Town Square Central.
Thank you very much for having me.
Before we get into your role as a GM, let's talk a bit about real life.
Sure.
So tell us about yourself when you are not GMing. What are you doing for work?
I work in the land development industry, civil engineering side of things. I've been doing that for more than 2 decades at this point, and I also am currently going to college, attempting to get my degree, which will let me test for license and move up in that same field.
That's awesome. How many classes are you doing right now?
I've been going full time, and so 4 classes at a time, 12 credit hours per semester.
Oh, so you're like diving all the way back in.
Well, see, I'm also not the youngest person on the block, so if I'm going to do this, I need to be doing it quickly.
Yeah, no, I understand. There's a time pressure. Are you working at the same time that you're doing school full time?
I am.
Oh, wow.
I work full time. I do full time school. I've got family, and of course, I do jamming.
And that's great. So I'm taking 1 class in addition to my job and my parenting and all that.
Sure.
And 1 class feels like too much. I don't know how you're doing that.
There are days when I don't either.
Yeah, it's a lot of caffeine, right?
Caffeine, absolutely, yes. Caffeine and an extremely understanding spouse.
Yeah. All right, and then I hear that you have a pretty incredible story about how you met your wife in game. Can you share that?
Absolutely. So I've been playing this game on and on since 1998, something like that, 20 years-ish.
Yeah.
And pretty much For the majority of my playtime, I have played this game more like a first-person shooter. I'm one of those guys who's kind of sits at a table, that runs out and just there to hunt, and then fries and goes back to the table and that sort of thing. So I
Yeah.
never really got involved in any sort of role play or anything like that. I understood it was out there. I just never really participated in it. So I I during one of my hiatuses, like every player in existence, I would go on hiatus from time to time and then come back because nobody ever leaves forever. Um, and I came back because I had acquired a character that was not mine originally, and I was kind of excited to check him out. I was like, oh, hey, let's see how this goes. So I log him in, and the very first thing I'm doing is I'm checking out, I want to see what his stats look like, what his skills look like. It's a new thing for me, so I'm all excited to do this. So that's the very first thing I do.
You're all excited to go back to the antisocial hunting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I understand.
So I log in and I'm checking all of these things and paying no attention to what's going on around me. And then a character in the room sort of glanced at me and giggled at me. Well, it wasn't until that moment that I realized that this character was completely naked.
Nice.
And of course, again, I was aware that people role played in this game and I knew how that worked and that sort of thing. So I attempted to sort of clumsily role play this along because I didn't know what was going on. I was, this was not a character that I was comfortable with. I didn't know how to play the character and that sort of thing. And that person was very kind to me in that moment and sort of brought me to town and bought me some cheap clothes and played it perfectly. And we just absolutely hit it off. And, here we are 20 some plus years later, we've got 5 kids and she's sitting over here smirking at me.
That's great. So you showed up naked, like the Terminator is what I'm picturing right now. You just appeared like smoking on the ground. Sure. And then this kindly person was like, oh, you're naked. Here's some clothing.
You know what? I really like the way that you put that better than what actually happened. So we'll go with your version.
Yeah, you're just the Terminator in my head. Right now. Yeah. Okay. All right. So you're married. Are you both still playing?
Not anymore. She played for a while and played for a while recently, but she's been gone from the game for, I don't know, a little over a year at this point.
Okay. She kind of got what she needed when she found you, and that was just it, right?
Well, I mean, that's the pinnacle, really, of her existence, I'm sure. No, God, no.
Absolutely. Yeah, she's no longer smirking, I'm sure.
Oh, no, she is.
Okay.
Whereas I always played this game as sort of like I said, like a first-person shooter and that sort of thing, she was much more interested in the socializing side of things and sort of playing her character, which I realize is a unique concept for a role-playing game. Right. But honestly, our lives just got so busy that, when you're doing things in just terms of, hey, I'm just going to log in. I've got 15 minutes here. I'm going to log in. I'm going to run a couple bounties. I'm going to unfry, and I can log back out, and I can be productive in that. If you're trying to play this game to, role play and interact with people, you can't really budget your time that way. And our lives are really just not all that conducive to that sort of role play.
Yeah, no, I would imagine. I mean, I have 2 kids. I would imagine 5 kids. Like, I couldn't do that.
And 2 grandkids.
Oh, well, congratulations. And yeah, definitely not something you can't spend like 14 hours grinding, right?
No.
Absolutely not. So other than Gemstone, like what else do you like to do in your spare time? And I'm guessing you don't have a ton of spare time given your other commitments, but like when you get little snippets, what is it that you like to do?
You would be correct in that. But I do a lot of reading. My wife and I both are big readers. I do audiobooks more than sort of text on a screen sort of thing. But that's pretty much it.
Do you have some favorites to share?
Oh, my goodness.
I know that's a tough question for a big reader, but...
well, if anybody hasn't read The Name of the Wind, the first couple books in that, then you have homework.
So I just read that I don't know, like a few months ago, and it blew my mind. It's phenomenal.
It's incredible.
It's really great.
Yeah. I would say that. The Stand is incredible. The Dresden Files are a lot of fun. I'm all over the place. So lately I've been listening a lot more to sort of, I wouldn't even know technically if they're amateur authors or independent authors or not, but like the Night Lord books are a lot of fun, and the Superpowered series is incredible. I don't know. I listen to a lot of books.
Yeah,
So I could
that's
go on
great.
and on.
The Stand is the Stephen King book that's like 1,500 pages long, right?
It is.
So in high school, I was reading that, and I was super excited because a friend had recommended it. I got almost to the end, and I told him, like, hey man, I'm like, 20 pages away from the end of this book. I'm super excited. I'm going to finish it after school today. And so, spoiler alert for anyone who has not read The Stand, you should skip ahead right now. I'm going to give you 5 seconds to do that. All right, I'm going to spoil it. So I get there, and he's like, oh, have you gotten to the part where he sets off the nuclear bomb and kills everybody? And I was like, what? What do you know? What?
No, not yet.
That happens? And so he like ruined the book right when I got to the end after I'd slogged through the longest book I've ever read in my entire life. And I didn't even have the nerve to not nerve. I just couldn't finish it. I was dead. And he has been dead to me ever since. It's
rightly so. Rightly so.
A terrible thing to do. I think that's
especially with that book. Like you said, it's however many million pages long.
Yeah, you really work to get, and it's a good book, but like you work,
Sure.
It's rough.
Yes.
All right. Okay. So let's bring it back to Gemstones. You said you started playing in '98, which I think is about the time I started playing. I think a lot of people started playing back then. What have you seen change at this point, 20, 30 years that you've been playing this game?
Lots. Everything has changed. So, like I was saying, I left and came back, and geez, I'm trying to think as if there's like one thing in particular that I could point at, but I would say just the fact that the game has grown so much. There seems to be this sort of mass opinion that there's nothing's ever being done or added to the game, or the game is stagnant, or things like that. And I just find that flabbergasting because the game is just constantly expanding at a crazy rate. There's just it seemed like every time I would leave for a hiatus or whatever and come back, there'd be a whole new, just incredible learning curve as I was like, oh wait, that's a thing now? What in the world? How am I supposed to do this? It keeps getting bigger. It keeps constantly getting bigger and better, and it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, no, I think that is true, and I think I have stepped away for years at a time or months at a time, and I do think that every time I come back, there's something new happening, like some new event, right? Yep. I mean, most recently with Rumor Woods and Mounts, which was a thing that, I mean, that's been a joke, like that's been a meme for decades now, right?
Well, to be fair, the verb was in the game.
So I know, that's what I'm saying. But like, it was all, but it's like, we'll never have it. We'll never have it. Right. And it was super fun to me to see people come on Elnet who hadn't been following that, and to be like, what's going on recently? And someone would be like, horses are coming out. And they'd be like, get out of here. And it's like, no, like that's really happening, like shortly. Yes. Yeah. So I agree about that. And I think that is, I think change can be slow in Gemstone, like big macro level changes, but there are always those little like tweaks and things happening around the margins that things are just constantly changing. And I think that is appealing.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the reason why, it's still around and still has as many people playing as it does.
I was talking to another GM actually just today, who I think is a friend of yours who works on the wiki. And we were talking about the fact that like no single person could ever contain even like a bit of the knowledge that you need in order to really understand everything about Gemstone. Like you have to have a wiki. You can't hold all this stuff in your head.
Well, and even that, so for so long there wasn't anything like a wiki. Of course, there was Crackypedia for a while, and then you can go back further, and there were 800 different GeoCities websites.
Oh God, I missed those accumulating, pages, man. I missed them. And they were all written in like first-person role-playing, right? It's like, welcome to my dwarven home.
Right.
Put the boots up over here, young sir. Like, I loved that stuff. It was great. Yes.
But so there's all of this sort of disparate knowledge that it's all compartmentalized. Yep. It's like shortly after I met my wife, we started hanging out in game, and she was taking me to all these incredible places that I'd never seen. There was no mechanical benefit to them, so I didn't even know they existed.
Right. Why would you bother going there?
Right. And she's like, have you ever gone to the fairy tree and seen the fairies? what are you talking about? Is that even a thing? And it is, that is a thing. But I mean, there's just so much, there's constantly something new to be found. I don't think anybody has seen everything in the game. There's constantly different things going on, or old things being unearthed, like, things coming back. It's like, oh, what in the world is that? I saw that blades had come back. And, the things and knowledge that he has is just incredible.
Yeah, so I recently moved most of my characters to the Elven Nations, and I've
Yeah,
seen him around. Yeah, it's just and so like that's the thing. I've spent my entire gemstone life in the landing because it's like, it's just where everyone was back then, and
sure.
it's just where I feel comfortable and safe. And I tried a new part of of this world, and I was like, oh, there's like a whole other. This is all cool too, I was like
Well,
afraid to leave this area. And over
sure.
here, like these people are great. They're super friendly. Like not everyone's not just like AFK, like sitting around. Like they're all talking to each other. It was pretty cool
Yeah.
to see that.
In kind of the same vein, shortly, don't want to misstate the timing, but there was a point at which I decided to move my characters down to the Elven Nations, and I went to go into Tavalor, and they're like, "Oh, you need papers to get in. You need papers to get in. What are you talking about? What's
Yeah,
going on
right.
here?" But again, that existed in game, and it was just something that I was completely unaware of as a player.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that I have tended, especially earlier in my like gemstone days, to be more the gemstone power hunter,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is like I think that's why a lot of people burn out, is because they're just like, oh, I'm gonna hit level 75 and then I'll have blah blah blah. But that's
yeah.
not fun. Like that's not gonna keep you committed to the
True.
game.
I think
Yeah.
those people tend to get tricked isn't the right word, but in the act of doing that, you come across other players who are doing the same thing, and one of the I've seen people complain about it. I think one of the cool things about the way the game is built and constructed is that you do have to rest after a hunt, and you're forced to take some time off from hunting if you want to, do things quote unquote properly. And if you're sitting around in an area with a bunch of players who are doing the same thing, you're going to start up conversations. I mean,
Yeah.
you're going to get bored, and by the time you've reached whatever personal level you've set, hopefully met some people along the way who are doing the same thing, and you're doing things besides power hunting.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's like forced socialization, right? Because otherwise
Sure.
it's just awkward. And I mean, I think some of the people that I know best in the game are people that just happened to be in the same. You'd be like, oh yeah, we're both gonna rest in the niche, and
Yep.
that's where we'll. It's like, I guess we'll talk. It's like,
Exactly.
you're actually a cool person.
Right. Or you see them die or something like that. And it's like, oh, hey, I know that name. That's
Yeah,
the
it's like,
person
well,
who's been sitting next
I
to me for
can't
last week.
exactly, I can't see them die and not save them because then I'm just
Right.
the jerk that didn't save them. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. Okay, so you are not only a longtime player of this game, but you're also a GM. So can you talk a little bit about how you became a GM, sort of how that desire came to be in you, and what the process of becoming one was like?
Sure. Um, I got really involved with an ongoing storyline in Ice Mule, and it was my first sort of exposure to really role playing a character. Like I said, I didn't normally play the game that way, but all my characters have been Ice Mule centric for as long as I can remember. And here was this big storyline starting up that happened to be running during the times when I was playing. So I'm like, sure, I'll dip my toe in, and got really, really involved with it. Was thoroughly enjoying it, but I couldn't help but, as things were going on, I'd start thinking, man, you know what? I would have done that differently. I would do this that way. And of course, that didn't mean anything. It's just random thoughts in the back of my head. But then after being involved with that for 6, 7, 8 months, something like that, there was an ad put up on the forums saying that they were going to be hiring for a game master, and sort of a light bulb went off in my head. I was like, well, this would be my chance to possibly,
Mm,
where the story went this way, I would be curious to see how the story would work if it went this way. And I was like, well, maybe this would be something that I could do. I honestly didn't have any expectation that I would meet whatever requirements they might have, but I figured there was no harm in taking a shot. So I put in my application and then sat on pins and needles for a while, and then they got back to me and offered me a position. And I, of course, immediately responded with, "Thank you, thank you, thank you, yes, please."
yeah, right. Yeah.
And yeah, I got hired.
So and so you're obviously like you're known well as being sort of a master storyteller, and a lot of your work has been with coming up with these very involved stories. Is that something that you knew going in would be your involvement, or is that something you specified in the application? Like, hey, this is what I see my strength as. How did you get into that niche?
Everybody goes through the same training. So you get hired to be a GM, and it's sort of like a cattle call. They bring everybody into the same training room. They run everybody through the same training. And while you're doing that, they're watching you and getting a feel for you. What are your strengths? And I was not aware of any sort of specific interview process for, hey, would you like to do this or would you like to do that? But I can say that everybody from my GM class got put in pretty much the perfect spot. So there was never a conversation with me, hey, would you like to, be on the subscriptions team and tell stories? But when the time came for me to be assigned to a team, that was the one that they assigned me to, and I couldn't have been happier.
So I'm picturing like when I tried out for like Little League, in middle school, and the coaches were all standing off to the side with their clipboards scoring people. That's what I'm picturing right now.
Sure,
but instead of coaches, it's like, I mean, who would that even be? So another name that I get wrong for years. I've been saying Wyram, right?
Yeah, you and everybody else.
Right. That's not right. So I'm picturing it's Worm, right?
Well, if you ask him, that's what he would tell you. But in this instance, actually, he is the one who is wrong. It actually is Wyram. He's just confused.
Oh, okay. So Wyram is standing there with his clipboard, and he's just like, a master storyteller, I see. I like that image. I'm going to keep that image. I don't care how accurate it is. I'm keeping it. I like it.
By all means, go for it.
All right. And so you have been involved in all these storylines. Which of the ones that you've done has been your favorite?
Honestly, they all have something kind of different to recommend them. If I had to say my favorite, it was probably the most recent, the Nazor Chronicles Chapter 1, just because that's more of... So as I do these, each subsequent one, I get better at doing things on my end. I get better at realizing sort of the vision that's in my twisted brain and being able to execute it. So I think that one was the one that sort of worked the best. Carnival of Freaks was a lot of fun, I will say. But
so I was gone for that, but I was reading about it, and it sounded awesome. Like, it sounded like a really fun story. Can you talk about that a bit?
So
what do you think made that so fun?
Honestly, it was Carnival of Freaks was an event put on solely by my GM class. The GMs graduate or get hired in what we call classes, and our class, as one of our final tasks, we had to put on an event. And they came to us and said, you guys need to put on an event. What do you want to do? And we all sort of put our heads together, and I got nominated as the person to do the storyline and sort of the venue and that sort of thing. And everybody bought in, and we coordinated like crazy. And you had a whole bunch of people who had nothing else to do, who had a lot of, because GMs have a lot of stuff going on at all times. But in this instance, everybody who was involved had nothing else to do. We were all, full of vim and vinegar, and we were ready to go. And it worked out really well.
Okay.
There was a lot of coordination behind the scenes. It was simple. It wasn't super complex. It was short. It was, just 3 days long. And it was smaller than a lot of people think. It's one of those things where, it's gratifying for me to see now, but, it's been somewhat glamorized from I'm thrilled that people enjoyed it as much as they did. I really, really am. But to read some of the comments now, you sort of get this mindset that it was this massive, huge, incredible thing, and it really wasn't. Yeah. I mean, it was much smaller than people think.
But the simple thing done well is more memorable than the grand thing that fails, right? I
mean, there's certainly something to that, but I will also say we were working with a very low degree of difficulty. It was not a very complex thing. It was, the basic storyline was there's a carnival of freaks. Some of them are completely evil. There's a demon involved. At the end of it, we drop a demon on everybody's head and we laugh and run away.
Yeah.
I mean, that
sounds like most invasions I'm familiar with. That sounds great. It's like a recipe for success,
Sure.
Yeah.
It was fun, but like I said, not a lot to it, and I do like the more complex,
Well,
layered.
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is that I would not, from what I know about you, I would say that simple doesn't really describe your approach to storytelling. And I read on the wiki you have the Keylett code up, right?
I
which
do.
which states that you're actively trying to involve people in storylines as much as you possibly can, which to
Yes.
me, it just sounds really stressful. Like I'm just picturing knowing what point A is and what point F is and what you think all the intermediate points are, but then introducing all of these elements of chaos and being like, you tell me where to go. Like that sounds terrible to me. It sounds really stressful to me. So
Honestly,
why is that active involvement so important to you?
well, okay, so what I try and do, and from what I know of other GMs, what we do is we like to do things. We make items that we'd like to have, or we tell stories we'd like to participate in. And this is the kind of story that I would like to participate in because as a player in this kind of environment, my hope is that players feel like empowered. They feel like, you know what, I can actually play my character. And that's something I want to encourage. My job is to make sure that everybody's having fun. At the
Right.
end of the day, that's my job. And people are a lot more fun when they're having a lot more fun, I think, when they're invested and they feel like what they do matters. So I wanted to introduce sort of that aspect of things. And I also, it's a lot more fun for me, honestly, when I'm forced to improvise. And so, like, it's like you're saying, point A and point F, and then all the intermediate points in between. When I do my stories, I know where we're starting, I know where the ending has to be, and I'm leaving it on you guys to tell me how we get there. So I
So
throw
can
it
you
out.
can you think of a specific time that you had an idea in your head of how things would go, or like a vague idea even, and then something happened that just took you in a totally different direction, and talk about how that affected your plan?
Okay, so for one thing, it happens all the time. I mean, and like the first few times it happened, I lost my mind. I'm like, how am I
Yeah.
supposed to deal with this?
Yeah.
I have no idea what to do now. I'm staring at the keyboard, completely lost. But it always kind of worked out. And so most of this type of storytelling I do is on more of a micro level, which is funny to say considering what the Nazar Chronicles have been about. But as far as like individual, like QST, the Quilic Standard Time or whatever you want to call it, my storyline uh, time frames, most of those episodes are really just small character to character interaction and things like that. So when things go completely awry, I just fall back on playing whatever NPC it is that I'm playing at the time.
Hmm.
So, like, for the point A, like we're talking about, where I know where this story is going to start. Well, I know who all my NPCs are. Like, even if it's not obvious to the players or whatever, I've got a really clear picture of what they're like, what their motivations are, what they do, what they wouldn't do, things like that. So, and I can just fall into that when somebody throws a curveball at me. It's like, well, I know who this character is. I wasn't planning for this to happen, but I know how my character would react to it. But
Right, and I guess if you trust the players that you're working with, like they can pick up the ball and carry it, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. And
yeah.
and that's again, that's something I want to encourage because the players who are willing to do that and able to do that get so much more out of the story.
Yeah. Well,
But
so that's the actual thing I wanted to talk about. I'm like to be completely honest, I have tried to get involved in some of your storylines, and I always feel super intimidated because so like I'll try and catch up on the Discord, right? Like I'll go into the
yeah,
premium chat, and I swear to God, I log on at like 5 a.m. when my 3-year-old wakes up, and
yeah,
people have been posting all night, and I can't follow it, and they're always super excited and earnest, and I'll like try to catch up, and I'm like, oh, I'll catch up on this later, and I'll check back in like a few hours later, and there's 250 new messages, with people like plotting and scheming and talking about puzzles. And so I
sure.
always just feel like everyone knows way more than I do. And so whenever these events happen, I'll show up, but I feel like I'm just kind of standing around. And I don't think I'm unique in that way. You mentioned your own experience, like before getting into the role playing side of things, just being kind of ignoring that. How can players who aren't involved a lot in storyline role playing become more involved in that?
There's a very real aspect of if you get into a crowd of people attending an event, you really have to be outrageous to stand out. I mean,
Yeah.
and for a lot of players, that's not who they are. It's not their personality. It's not their player's personality. That's sort of a turnoff.
But it also
I
just seems kind of obnoxious, right?
Sure.
Well, everyone is sort of standing around like leaning and, raising their eyebrows. Like I don't want to like light the building on fire, like it's just that's not going to add anything here.
But even at that, like I get into a lot of situations where it's my character talking with a bunch of the players who have showed up, and it's speech, and of course all of the little ticks and things that go along with that. Well, in order to stand out, some players feel like they need to be the most outrageous or say
Yeah.
the craziest thing or things like that. Um, I I would say a don't do that.
Okay. Yeah. Yep.
Um, and so for my story, like you mentioned, the Discord, I understand that's not an option for everybody, and some players don't even prefer that. But I've had quite a few people contact me and say hey, through Discord and say, "Hey, I'd really like to get more involved. This is kind of what my player is. This is what my player, or I'm sorry, my character is, and what my character's approach would be, and things like that." And I work with them to find them sort of a role in the story that then they can play out. The other thing that I swear by is the MyCare command, MyChar, for people who don't know about it.
I don't
It's a
know about
huge,
this.
oh, it's fantastic. So, in this scenario, your character is standing there in a crowd of people who are all screaming, lynch him or whatever it is they're saying, and you're completely lost. Well, you can type in game my care and short for my character, and you can say my care thinks I'm completely lost. What's going on here? And you enter that, and the only people who can see that are GMs who are in the room.
What? How long is it? I just typed that in on my I've never seen this in my life. I didn't know this existed. Okay. All right.
Existed
So
for a
this is
long
a way
time.
you can kind of like subtly signal like, "Hey, I'd like to be involved. Here's a way that you could loop me in."
Absolutely, and
Oh,
I
man.
encourage my players to use that all the time because in that scenario, maybe some player would be like, "My character has knows a secret about this guy," and I might not have any clue what you're saying, but I'll be like, "Great, I'll throw it to you. Hey, do you have something to contribute here?" And then you're on stage, and good luck. A lot of the players who are more commonly show up to my events use it just to sort of document their character's reactions to things without being blatant about it. It's like my character thinks that character's full of crap. My character thinks there's something else going on here,
Yeah.
and that lets me get a sense of the characters that are involved because
Yeah.
that's when I'm trying to do this. I like when I'm sitting down to plan out an episode of QST because it's so dynamic and because the players are given a lot of free reign. I can't sit down and script out, okay, Thursday we're doing this, then Sunday we're doing this, then next
Right.
Thursday we're doing this. I have no idea where we're going to be next Thursday because that's on the players.
Right.
So generally I do it the day before, and I'll try and like frame it out and say, okay, I need a player to do X. And I think through it's like, okay, of the players who generally show up and the things they've said, be it like the my cares or things that I know about their character, that would be a character that I'd want to sort of throw this situation to because I'd probably get the reaction I'm looking for out of them, which then lets me develop the story that I want to.
So you're really keeping track of these things for the purpose of building in the future.
As best I can.
Yeah. That's cool. I had no idea about that, so I'm really excited to know that.
Yeah,
Every time I see a GM now, I'm just gonna spam that constantly, and I'm gonna
that's
say
a great
blame
idea.
Quilic.
Yeah,
Blame him.
well, leave that last part out, but then other than that, yes, do that.
Yeah. All right. You talked about how the Nazareth Chronicles Part 1 just concluded, and it's the one that you're really excited about because you feel like you've sort of evolved in the way that you're approaching storytelling here. Can you give us just a brief summary of what's happened so far, and then what we know about what's coming in Part 2, and then what you're hoping to get out of that next sequence?
Let's see, the Reader's Digest version, the end of the world is coming, and we're trying really hard to prevent it.
All right, I like that. Short and sweet.
So basically, there in chapter 1, we introduced, I introduced. I'm going to use the royal we here because that way I can divert responsibility.
As is custom.
Right. So I introduced the concept of the meek, and the meek are there's one per world, and when I say world, think like alternate dimensions and things like that. So every iteration of worlds out there has a meek, and the meek's job, the meek are individually extremely powerful, and their job is to keep the world in balance. So to keep things from going completely haywire. And they keep a low profile, which is why nobody's ever known about them before, because they don't want things to get out of balance, which could happen if they were to become involved with everyday affairs. If you're read any comics, I borrowed quite a bit from the idea of the Watcher from Marvel when I was coming up with this idea.
Yeah.
And the pitch for Nazor Chronicles Volume 1, Nazor is the bad guy, and Nazor was this world's Meek, and he lost his mind. He went completely nuts. So he stopped doing his job or started doing it incorrectly, and wackiness ensued, and players were forced to both deal with the wackiness and also figure out what was going on. Nobody had any clue. I can be rather archaic at times, and I do like puzzles and.
No, I picked up on that. I picked up.
Really. Well, that's impressive because I'm very subtle about it.
Yeah.
So it was sort of a wild round of craziness all through chapter 1 as people sort of were forced to figure out via the number of clues that I threw out and their own actions what was going on.
Yeah.
And also it worked out. I couldn't be happier because in chapter 1, sort of organically. So to take a half step back, I leave it up to the players. If the players come to me and say, "Hey, I want to do this," as long as it's not going to completely wipe things out on my end, I'm like, "Great, let's do it." Early on, I had a couple players approach me who were members of the Council of Light, and they said that they would like to play a role as basically bad guys in my storyline.
Love that.
And they did a phenomenal job. And so we had factions working against each other, and they were player factions. We had the good guys and the bad guys, and we had all sorts of intrigue as to who's on whose side really. And there was lots of spying and all kinds of just awesome insanity. At the end of the first chapter, which just concluded, the Nazor was stripped of his powers as a Meek. So at the moment, the world has no Meek, which is a bad thing.
Right.
But the players sort of they weren't given a whole lot of options, but the players nominated an individual, another NPC, Elspie, who is currently in training to figure out how to be a Meek and get things back on track for our world. What I try and do is I try and make it to where somebody who is completely unaware of all the tiny little machinations along the way can still follow the broad picture of things.
Yeah.
If you want to participate just by showing up each Thursday and Sunday and standing there and reacting to what's going on around you, you can do that and still have an idea of what's going on. Now, there's going to be some parts you don't get, but you can still follow the greater story. For players who are trying to get caught up, the other thing is I hesitate to name drop, and I'm not going to, but there are a few players who have been involved with the story from the beginning who have been amazing about, in character, spreading the word. I mean, basically, and if you're looking to get involved, just hook up with one of those players in game, and they will completely in character walk you through things from their point of view. And I could not be more appreciative of that. I don't want to, because I don't want to drop names in particular.
But I'm sure that we could find that information on the Discord if we were so inclined.
Absolutely could. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, cool. That sounds great. So what's coming in part 2? We don't know. How much can you give away?
So at the end of part 1, part 1 ended with a sort of high-level negotiation where everybody agreed, both the good guys and the bad guys sat down at the negotiating table and said, look, reality is going to end if we don't put our differences aside and work together on this. So that's where chapter 2 starts, is a very uneasy truce where basically they're out to try, because even though Nazor was stripped of his power, he's still out there. He's still very powerful in and of himself. He's definitely the bad guy, and he needs to be taken care of. So chapter 2 that's roughly the starting point of chapter 2. You've got Elspie still off in her cottage trying to figure out how to be a Meek. So she's got a more important job. Her job is to figure out how to keep the world from tearing itself apart.
Yeah, that matters.
This is important. And then the players are sort of technically united in their desire to find and kill Nazor. But of course, everybody has their own motivations. I've got the story framed out through the middle of next year. But
wow.
There will be hiatuses and things like that as events crop up. But for the most part, yeah, this is a very long, ongoing story with some big stuff coming down the line.
And do you know your starting and ending points already?
And honestly, it sounds wonderful for me to say, oh, I've got the story completely fleshed out through the middle of next year.
Yeah.
What I mean is I've got the starting and ending points for each sort of individual chapter of it. And the in between, who knows?
You're ready to have others help you sort of figure out how to get there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The Quilic code.
Exactly. There you go.
Yeah. So you've been a GM for about a year, coming up on 2 years. Is that right?
Closer to a year. Let me look at dates here. Yeah, a little over a year.
Okay. And so in that year, how would you say you've grown since you started in your role?
Oh my goodness, it's more a level of comfort. Well, like I was saying earlier, I have stories in my head that I want to tell, and I want to sort of transmit to the players in a way that makes sense. It is clear to what's in my twisted brain, and I've just gotten better at doing that, finding little tips and little tricks. If I did this way as opposed to that way, it would be a little smoother on the player's end, and this is something that I can do. And just there's a whole lot of options that it's just getting a level of comfort with because so much of what I do is improv. I have to be able to, right off the bat, some player throws a curveball at me, I have to dip into my toolbox of things that I'm completely comfortable with. I can't be trying something, that I'm not 100% sure it's going to work, because that could ruin it for the players who are watching. They might not be able to keep up.
Right.
And so I would say over the course of the year, I've just been slowly expanding that toolbox and coming up with, okay, I can do this now. In a situation like this, I know that I have these 3 options, whereas before I only had this one, or things like that.
And so in the next year that you're going to be GMing, what is it that you're hoping to grow in during that time?
Oh my goodness. I'd like to write more scripts. I enjoy that aspect of things. And I'm enjoying this storyline, and I really want to have. My hope is that I can keep this storyline with these characters, plus or minus a few, depending on how it goes, intact and moving forward, and make it this sort of epic-ish, at least by Gemstone standards, story.
Yeah. How long do these stories typically run? I'm pretty ignorant of this. I'm just curious.
Honestly, it's different for every story and every GM. I know that the Ice Mule storyline that was going on ran for about a year.
Yeah.
Of course, Kenstrom and Landing, his stories are pretty darn epic and have ties to each other and things like that. I don't even know if you could identify a good starting and stopping point for that stuff.
Yeah.
It depends on the GM. So much of what GMs do is things that they are interested in.
Right.
At the end of the day, there's a lot of things that players wish would get done for the game. And believe me, there's a lot of things that GMs wish would get done for the game. But it's a case of you got to find somebody who has the requisite skills, know-how, and sort of passion to do. Otherwise, it's not going to get done. And if it does, if you force somebody to do something that they don't like or aren't passionate about, it's going to show in the final product. So, and some GMs who are on the subscriptions team who are involved with telling stories get more out of telling shorter stories. And so that's what they do. Some people like to tell big, long, epic stories, and that's what they do. And we try and, I like to use the analogy of a 3-ring circus. I don't know if the higher ups use it or not, but I like to think, Gemstone, when it works best, is a 3-ring circus. There's something going on somewhere for everybody who's if my storyline isn't your thing, hopefully there's something else going on at roughly the same time that is your thing, that can hold your attention. And that's why we're feeding all kinds of needs, hopefully.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. How involved with other folk, like other GMs or with official staff, are you? Other than, obviously, like, are you working basically on your own? Are you like having regular meetings with people? Are you collaborate? I'm just curious.
That's left largely up to each GM.
Okay.
It's certainly it's encouraged for us to work together. Some GMs don't, and honestly, sometimes it's hard to match up, schedules and things like that. I mean, that's a whole other thing, the logistics of that. But I've collaborated with a couple of GMs on things. Certainly, that is always available. It's readily available, I would say. If I have a desire to collaborate with somebody on something, that's always been really easy to accomplish. It's something that they facilitate really well. It's just a matter of if it makes sense for something that a particular GM is doing, then and they're interested in doing it, then it's easy to accomplish.
Okay. Okay, and then so to wrap things up, I'm thinking more in your role as GM. If you could take on any project under the sun, what would you like to tackle?
We are in the process, and I can say this because it's already been, said officially. We're in the process of adding hunting grounds to Four Winds Island.
Yeah.
Hunting is coming to FWI, and I could not be more excited about that. That is in process. So over the course of the next year or so, I want to use that as sort of a springboard. I want to make Mist Harbor a real town. I want to have it be a place where people live, where they interact, where they stay, and not just a place for people to park their alts.
Yep.
Now, is that ever going to happen? I understand. There's some things that make that a little more difficult than maybe it should be, but that's my overarching goal. I want to make Mist Harbor a real town.
Make it livable.
Yes, absolutely.
I like that. I think that's an admirable goal.
Even if it doesn't happen, any step I take in that direction is a positive improvement.
Right.
So even if I don't get there, it's a great goal.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we've got Nazareth Chronicles Part 2 coming up soon. We've got a lot of exciting storyline and just general fun, awesome stuff happening.
That's the idea.
Yeah. Well, Quilic, thank you so much for talking with us on Town Square Central. It was awesome to have you. We really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. It was a great time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. That's everything I have for today. Thanks to a few folks who've helped me in getting this project up off the ground. Crowwolf created the original logo design, and Aluena helped with some additional artwork that will be up very soon. Thanks also to everybody who listened to the first episode and shared their feedback. Please keep it coming. I can be reached via email at gsivpodcast@gmail.com. You've been listening to Town Square Central with Milax. Until next time, enjoy some quality time with the critters you're about to destroy.
I don't know if you've seen the routine yet, but my GM name is pronounced Quilic, as in a liquor of keys.
Oh man, you didn't even give me a chance to get it wrong.
Well, I'm trying to help you out here.
All right, that's all right. I have established myself as like super unreliable with getting people's names, because in my head it was Quilic.
That's in everybody's head.
Quilic.
Quilic.
I feel like I need to come up with like a weird way to say my name. It'd be like it's actually Malax.
Right. There's actually a hidden Y in there somewhere.
Yeah, and an umlaut or two, something funky.
Absolutely.
All right. So Quilic.
Quilic.
Got it. All right. Here we go.